Welcome back to the channel where unspoken desires run wild and passions ignite in the most untamed places. Have you ever felt the crushing weight of a life that no longer belongs to you, only to find salvation in the intense, unforgiving gaze of a stranger? Today, we journey to the rugged heart of Montana, where the wide-open skies conceal a tension so thick you can feel it in every breath. Will the delicate city boys survive the brutal reality of the wilderness? Or will the hardened rancher break his spirit before the sun goes down? Settle in, let your imagination roam free, and let the story begin. The dust kicked up by the tires of the rental car created a thick, golden cloud in the rearview mirror, but Ethan did not look back. He could not afford to look back. Behind him lay the shattered remains of his life in Chicago, the collapsed family finance firm, the relentless phone calls, the heavy, suffocating weight of expectations he had never asked to carry. Ahead of him lay nothing but the vast, intimidating expanse of the Montana landscape. The sky here felt different, impossibly wide and heavy, pressing down on the jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains in the distance. He drove until the paved road surrendered to gravel, and the gravel surrendered to dirt. Finally, the massive, imposing wooden gates of the Black Ridge loomed ahead. The name was burned into a massive archway of raw timber, looking more like a warning than a welcome sign. Ethan shifted the car into park and let out a long, trembling breath. He looked down at his hands, resting on the steering wheel. They were smooth, unblemished, the hands of a man who had never done a day of hard, physical labor in his 23 years. He tugged nervously at the collar of his brand-new, slate-gray jacket. The fabric was pristine, stiff, screaming of city life and coffee shops. He felt entirely, hopelessly out of place. He stepped out of the car, and the biting wind immediately whipped through his ash-blonde hair, sending a shiver down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. The air smelled of dry earth, pine needles, and something wild he could not name. The ranch was sprawling, a complex of weathered red barns, sturdy wooden corrals, and a sprawling main house that looked like it had stood for a century. But there was no time to take in the scenery. A heavy, rhythmic thudding sound echoed across the dirt courtyard. Ethan turned, and his breath hitched sharply in his throat. Emerging from the shadow of the largest barn was a man on horseback, moving with a slow, deliberate grace that commanded the space around him. The horse was a massive, midnight black creature, but it was the rider who entirely paralyzed Ethan. Colt Sterling, the owner of the Black Ridge. Ethan had only spoken to him briefly on the phone, a gruff, low voice that had reluctantly agreed to take on a temporary ranch hand. Seeing him in person, however, was a profoundly different experience. Colt reined the horse to a halt a few yards away, the animal tossing its head, sensing the sudden, palpable tension in the air. Colt did not dismount. He sat tall in the saddle, looking down at Ethan with an expression of quiet, devastating authority. He was 39, but he carried the rough, weathered history of the land in every line of his face. His jaw was square and dark with a few days of stubble, framing lips that rested in a hard, cynical line. Beneath the brim of his dusty Stetson, his eyes were the color of cold steel, sharp and piercing, taking in every single detail of a young man standing before him. A faint, rugged scar cut through his left eyebrow, adding a dangerous edge to his already intimidating presence. He wore a faded, heavy canvas shirt that bore the marks of relentless work, and worn leather boots coated in the pale dust of the Rockies. He radiated a raw, unapologetic power, a quiet dominance that made Ethan's heart hammer relentlessly against his ribs. The air between them seemed to crackle, thickening with a sudden, unspoken friction. Ethan felt an intense, irrational heat flood his cheeks under the slow, deliberate sweep of Colt's steel-blue gaze. The rancher was looking at him not just as a newcomer, but as an intruder, a soft, fragile thing dropped into an unforgiving world. "You lost, city boy," Colt finally spoke. His voice was exactly as Ethan remembered, but deeper, rumbling with a low resonance that vibrated through the crisp mountain air. It was a voice used to commanding respect, giving orders, and never being questioned. Ethan stood a little straighter, forcing himself not to shrink under the weight of that heavy stare. He shoved his smooth, trembling hands into the pockets of his expensive jacket, trying to project a confidence he absolutely did not feel. "I am Ethan. We spoke on the phone. I am here for the ranch hand job." A slow, mocking smile curved the corner of Colt's mouth, not quite reaching his cold, calculating eyes. He leaned forward slightly, resting his gloved hands on the saddle horn, the leather creaking softly in the quiet afternoon. The sound sent an inexplicable flutter of nervousness straight to Ethan's chest. "I know who you are. What I'm trying to figure out is why you're still standing here in that shiny catalog jacket. This is a working ranch, kid, not a retreat for lost souls. There are no lattes here, no safe spaces. The dirt is real, the cold is real, and the work will break you if you're not careful, Doc." The words were spoken evenly, quietly, but they carried a biting edge that struck a nerve deep inside Ethan. The dismissal in Colt's tone was infuriating, yet, at the exact same time, it ignited a strange, unfamiliar spark within him. A desperate, burning need to prove this imposing man wrong. To show him that beneath the soft skin and the expensive clothes, there was a resilience Colt could not see. "I didn't come for coffee," Ethan replied, his voice surprisingly steady, holding the rancher's piercing gaze. "I came to work. Show me what to do to—" Colt's gaze narrowed slightly, the steel blue deepening as he assessed the sudden flare of defiance in the younger man's eyes. A beat of heavy, charged silence passed between them. The wind howled softly around the barn, rustling the dry leaves, but neither man broke the connection. It was a silent contest of wills, an unspoken negotiation of boundaries. Colt was waiting for Ethan to look away, to yield to his natural authority. Ethan refused. Finally, Colt let out a short, rough exhale that might have been a laugh, though there was no humor in it. He swung himself down from the saddle with effortless, fluid grace, his boots hitting the dirt with a heavy thud. He was taller than Ethan had anticipated, his physical proximity overwhelming. Colt tossed the reins over the wooden fence and took a slow, deliberate step toward Ethan. The scent of the man hit Ethan like a physical wave: leather, cedarwood, horses, and the distinct, masculine warmth of a body accustomed to hard labor. Ethan had to force his feet to remain planted on the ground. He could feel the sheer heat radiating from the older man, a magnetic pull that made his breath turn shallow and uneven. Colt stopped mere inches away, towering over him, his broad shoulders blocking out the sun. He looked down, his eyes trailing over Ethan's pristine collar, tracing the delicate line of his throat before meeting his eyes again. The proximity was dizzying. "Fine. You want to work?" Colt's voice had dropped to a dangerous, hushed register. "Barn 3. 6 stalls. They need to be mucked out, scrubbed down, and re-bedded before the sun drops behind that ridge. You will find a pitchfork and a wheelbarrow by the door. If you are still here when I get back, maybe we will talk about tomorrow, Doc." It was a test. A blatant, brutal test designed to humiliate him, to blister his soft hands and shatter his resolve, so he would pack his bags and drive his rental car right back to the city. Ethan knew it. Colt knew he knew it. "I will be here," Ethan murmured, his voice tight, refusing to back down from the overwhelming intensity of the rancher's stare. Colt lingered for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. His gaze darkened, a flicker of something unreadable passing through those icy depths before he turned on his heel. "We will see." Colt threw over his shoulder, leading his horse away toward the main house, leaving Ethan standing alone in the biting wind, his heart racing, his skin flushed, and his mind consumed by the rough, intoxicating presence of the man who had just challenged his entire existence. Barn 3 was massive, dimly lit, and smelled powerfully of damp hay, earth, and animal heat. The silence inside was thick, broken only by the occasional restless stamp of a hoof from the horses further down the aisle. Ethan found the wheelbarrow and the heavy, rusted pitchfork exactly where Colt had said they would be. He took off his new jacket, hanging it carefully over a wooden post, rolling up the sleeves of his crisp, pale blue button-down shirt. The temperature inside the barn was freezing, but a nervous, anticipatory heat still clung to his skin. He stepped into the first stall. The reality of the task hit him immediately. The work was not just hard. It was agonizing, relentless, back-breaking labor. Thrusting the heavy pitchfork into the soiled bedding, lifting it, tossing it into the wheelbarrow. Over and over. Within the first 20 minutes, his shoulders were burning with a fierce, stabbing ache. Within the first hour, his breath was coming in ragged gasps. His chest heaving as sweat began to soak through the back of his shirt, plastering the thin fabric to his skin. The silence of the ranch gave his mind too much room to race. As he drove the pitchfork into the ground, he thought of the ruined offices in Chicago, the look of profound disappointment on his father's face, the feeling of losing everything that had once defined him. But with every thrust, those memories were slowly eclipsed by a single, dominating image: Colt Sterling. The hard line of his jaw, the mocking smirk, the dark, dangerous intensity of his eyes when he stood just inches away. Ethan gritted his teeth, pushing a heavy, overflowing wheelbarrow down the uneven aisle. The rough wooden handles of the barrow dug mercilessly into his palms. He stopped halfway to the disposal pile, letting out a sharp hiss of pain. He turned his hands over, squinting in the dim light filtering through the high windows. Angry, red blisters had already formed at the base of his fingers, one of them tearing open, the raw skin stinging fiercely against the cold air. His soft, unblemished hands were already breaking under the pressure of Colt's world. A wave of overwhelming frustration crashed over him. He wanted to drop the handles. He wanted to march up to the main house, throw the keys at Colt's chest, and drive away. It would be so easy to surrender, to admit that the rancher was right, that he was nothing more than a fragile tourist playing a dangerous game. He closed his eyes, his chest rising and falling rapidly. If he left now, he would be proving Colt right. He would just be running away again, another failure added to the list. He remembered the heavy, suffocating feeling of Colt's gaze, the quiet mockery in his voice. The thought of that arrogant smirk widening into a victorious smile was too much to bear. Ethan took a deep, trembling breath, gripping the wooden handles again. The pain was sharp, electric, shooting up his forearms, but he pushed the wheelbarrow forward, forcing his legs to keep moving. He returned to the stalls, his movements slower now, less coordinated, but driven by a stubborn, reckless determination. The dust coated his throat, his hair fell into his eyes in damp, messy strands, and his once pristine shirt was smeared with dirt and sweat. He lost track of time, lost track of the cold, entirely consumed by the physical agony and the burning desire to survive the day. Outside, the sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long, dramatic shadows across the dusty courtyard. The sky turned bruised shades of purple and burnt orange. The wind picked up, rattling the heavy wooden doors of the barn. Leaning against the exterior wall of the barn, half hidden in the deepening shadows, Colt stood perfectly still. A piece of dry straw rested between his lips as he watched through the gap in the sliding doors. He had been there for the last half hour, his steel-blue eyes tracking every agonizing movement the city boy made. Colt had fully expected to find the pitchfork thrown on the ground and the rental car gone by noon. He knew the toll that specific job took on a body unaccustomed to labor. He had designed it to break him. Yet there Ethan was, stumbling, exhausted, clearly in pain, but refusing to stop. Colt watched the way Ethan's chest heaved, the way the sweat made his shirt cling to the exhausted slump of his shoulders. He watched Ethan pause to inspect the ruined, bleeding palms of his hands, only to grip the pitchfork again with a trembling, stubborn fury. A strange, unfamiliar tightness gripped Colt's chest. The initial irritation he felt toward the soft, entitled stranger was slowly twisting into something entirely different. Something darker, deeper, and profoundly distracting. There was a fragile, unexpected beauty in Ethan's silent suffering, a fierce, underlying fire that Colt had not anticipated. The kid was soft, yes, but he wasn't weak. Colt's gaze darkened as he watched Ethan lift another heavy load, his jaw clenched tight in determination. The rancher's fingers twitched instinctively against the worn denim of his jeans. An intense, heavy wave of heat settled low in his gut. A sudden, undeniable urge to step into the barn, to take the heavy tool from those bleeding hands, to pull the exhausted young man against his own chest and feel the frantic, racing beat of his heart. The realization hit Colt with the force of a physical blow. He had intended to break the city boy, to send him packing back to his safe, comfortable world. But as he stood in the shadows, watching Ethan fight a solitary battle against the unforgiving reality of the Black Ridge, Colt realized with a dangerous thrill that he did not want Ethan to leave. He wanted him to stay. He wanted to see how far that fire could burn. 3 weeks had passed since that first grueling day. 3 weeks that felt more like a lifetime. The brutal reality of the Montana wilderness had systematically stripped away Ethan's city veneer, replacing his tailored clothes with borrowed canvas and his soft hands with calluses and healing blisters. Every day was an unspoken battle of wills. Colt pushed him relentlessly, assigning him the most grueling tasks, watching from a distance with that same unreadable steel blue gaze. And every day, Ethan refused to break. Between the agonizing labor and the deafening silence of the sprawling landscape, a heavy, palpable tension had slowly coiled tight between the two men. It was a friction built on sideways glances, accidental brushes in the narrow barn aisles, and the silent, unspoken recognition of something dangerous simmering just beneath the surface. The morning the storm hit, there had been no warning. The sky above the jagged peaks of the Rockies was a bruised, heavy shade of iron, but Colt had insisted they needed to push a stray herd of cattle down from the high pastures before the freeze settled in. Ethan had followed, riding a sturdy roan gelding, his body wrapped in layers of thick wool and heavy denim that still failed to keep the biting chill at bay. Up ahead, cutting a sharp, imposing silhouette against the bleak horizon, was Colt on his massive black stallion. He rode with a fluid, effortless dominance that Ethan found both deeply frustrating and endlessly captivating. Then the world simply vanished. It was not a gradual snowfall. It was a sudden, violent explosion of white. The wind roared down through the narrow mountain pass with the ferocity of a freight train, instantly dropping the temperature to a level of cold Ethan had never experienced in his life. The air turned into a blinding, suffocating wall of driving ice. Within seconds, the mountains, the valley, the cattle, and most terrifyingly, Colt, were completely swallowed by the ferocious blizzard. Panic, sharp and icy, clawed at Ethan's throat. He pulled his thick scarf up over his nose, his eyes watering and freezing almost instantly. He turned his horse in a frantic, disoriented circle, straining to see through the impenetrable whiteout. "Colt!" Ethan screamed, his voice instantly snatched away and swallowed by the howling gale. "Colt, where are you?" His horse, sensing the rider's mounting terror and the brutal, unnatural drop in the air pressure, began to dance nervously, throwing its head back and stepping sideways into the rapidly accumulating snowdrifts. Ethan gripped the heavy leather of the saddle horn with numb, clumsy fingers, his heart hammering a frantic, desperate rhythm against his ribs. The cold was no longer just a sensation. It was a physical weight pressing down on him, sinking its freezing teeth deep into his bones. He had no sense of direction. He was entirely, hopelessly alone. A sudden, violent gust of wind slammed into the ridge, carrying with it the sharp, terrifying crack of a massive pine branch snapping under the weight of the ice. The sound spooked the roan gelding entirely. The horse reared up with a frantic whinny, twisting violently to the side. Ethan, already half frozen, exhausted, and running on pure adrenaline, lost his stirrups. His numb hands slipped from the leather, and the world spun in a dizzying, terrifying blur of white and gray. The impact was brutal. He hit the snow-covered ground hard, the breath knocked completely from his lungs in a sharp, agonizing gasp. He lay there for a long moment, the world spinning, the snow immediately rushing to bury him. He tried to push himself up, commanding his arms to move, but his limbs felt heavy, entirely useless. The cold was overwhelming now, seeping through his heavy coat, wrapping around him like a dark, heavy blanket that promised an easy, peaceful sleep if he would only close his eyes. The silence beneath the roaring wind was deafening. This was it. He was going to disappear out here. Then, through the blinding, swirling haze, a shadow emerged. It was huge, terrifying, and moving with a desperate, reckless speed. The frozen ground vibrated faintly before the massive shape of Colt's black horse materialized from the whiteout. The animal was breathing hard, its chest coated in a thick layer of frost, but it was the man practically throwing himself out of the saddle before the horse had even fully stopped that made Ethan's heart stutter and leap in his chest. Colt did not look like the stoic, cynical rancher anymore. The mask of cool, calculated authority was completely, utterly shattered. As he dropped to his knees in the deep snow beside Ethan, his steel blue eyes were wide, frantic, stripped of all their usual armor. "Ethan!" Colt's voice cracked over the howling wind, rough and filled with a raw, undeniable terror that sent a shocking, electric wave of heat straight to the center of Ethan's freezing chest. Large, heavy hands encased in thick leather gloves grabbed Ethan by the shoulders, hauling him up from the suffocating snow with a terrifying strength. Colt's grip was almost painful, completely desperate, as if he were trying to anchor the younger man to the earth by sheer force of will alone. He brushed the accumulating snow from Ethan's pale, freezing face with frantic, hurried motions, his thumbs lingering for a fraction of a second against the younger man's icy cheek. "Look at me," Colt commanded, his voice a low, rough rumble that vibrated intensely against Ethan's skin. "Open your eyes, kid. Look right at me, duh." Ethan forced his heavy, frost-crusted eyelids open, meeting that intense, piercing gaze. The vast, empty space of the wilderness instantly vanished. Colt was so close that Ethan could feel the ragged, uneven warmth of the older man's breath ghosting across his own shivering lips. The fierce, terrifying protectiveness radiating from the rancher was overwhelming, an intense, burning heat that entirely eclipsed the bitter cold of the storm. "I've got you. You hear me? I am not letting this mountain take you, Doc." Before Ethan could process the heavy, loaded meaning behind those desperate words, Colt moved. With a surge of raw, effortless power, he lifted Ethan entirely off his feet, carrying him through the knee-deep snow toward the massive black horse. Ethan clung helplessly to the heavy canvas of Colt's coat, his face pressed tightly against the solid, immovable wall of the rancher's chest. Beneath the layers of winter gear, he could hear the frantic, heavy thudding of a heart that he had always assumed was made of impenetrable stone. Colt swung Ethan up into the saddle with rough efficiency, immediately climbing up right behind him. The saddle was meant for one rider, leaving absolutely no space between them. Colt's strong, incredibly solid arms wrapped securely around Ethan's waist to grab the reins, pulling the younger man back flush against his own body, effectively shielding him from the brutal, driving wind with his broader, heavier frame. The horse surged forward, fighting a brutal path through the blizzard. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut, shivering violently, but beneath the agonizing cold, a deep, resonant warmth was slowly blooming where his back was pressed flush against Colt's chest. He was entirely surrounded, enveloped in the scent of wet leather, pine needles, and the overwhelming, intoxicating presence of the man holding him. Every movement of the horse forced their bodies to shift and slide against one another in a rhythm that made Ethan's breath catch painfully in his throat. It felt like hours before a dark, square shape finally appeared through the dense line of trees. It was an old line cabin, a weathered relic of the past. Colt rode right up to the small porch, practically tearing Ethan from the saddle and carrying him up the wooden steps. He kicked the heavy wooden door open, carried Ethan inside, and slammed it shut behind them, throwing the heavy iron latch. The sudden, absolute absence of the roaring wind was deafening. The cabin was dark, smelling strongly of dust and old wood ash. It was completely freezing inside, but it was a shelter. Colt set Ethan down on a heavy, rustic wooden bench positioned near a large stone hearth. "Do not move," Colt ordered, his voice incredibly tight. Ethan sat completely paralyzed, his entire body trembling so violently he could hear his own teeth clicking together. His clothes were soaked completely through. He watched through blurred, half-closed eyes as Colt moved around the small space with frantic purpose. The rancher found dry kindling, a stack of split logs, and a box of matches. Within moments, a small, flickering orange glow illuminated the dark cabin, slowly growing into a roaring fire. The warm light danced across the rough-hewn logs of the walls, casting long, shifting shadows. Colt stood up slowly from the hearth and turned to face Ethan. The tension in the small, enclosed room instantly skyrocketed, shifting dramatically from the frantic panic of survival to something infinitely heavier, darker, and profoundly electric. The air between them seemed to thicken, growing impossibly dense. The loud crackle of the fire was the only sound breaking the heavy silence. Colt's steel-blue eyes were completely unreadable in the flickering amber light as he took a slow, deliberate step toward the bench. He reached up, pulling his own heavy Stetson from his head and tossing it onto a nearby table, running a hand through his dark, wind-swept hair. He stopped right in front of Ethan. The proximity was dizzying. Ethan tilted his head up, his breath coming in shallow, ragged little gasps that had nothing to do with the cold air and everything to do with the intense, predatory focus of the man standing over him. "You are freezing to death in those layers," Colt murmured, his voice dropping to a low, rough register. "They have to come off. Now?" Ethan tried to speak, tried to form a coherent sentence, to say he could do it himself, but his jaw was locked tight from the shivering, and his numb fingers could not even grasp the edges of his ruined coat. He looked up at Colt, a silent, helpless plea in his eyes. Colt's expression softened, the harsh lines of his face melting into something dangerously close to profound tenderness. He dropped to one knee in front of the bench, placing himself right between Ethan's legs, invading his personal space so completely that Ethan could feel the heat radiating from the older man's skin. "Let me," Colt said quietly, a statement, not a question. Colt reached out, his large, calloused hands grasping the zipper of Ethan's heavy, soaked jacket. The rancher's knuckles accidentally brushed against the sensitive skin of Ethan's jawline, and the contact was like a live wire. Ethan gasped softly, his eyes fluttering shut for a fraction of a second. Slowly, Colt pulled the zipper down. He peeled the heavy, wet canvas off Ethan's trembling shoulders, tossing the ruined garment onto the floor. Colt moved closer, his broad chest almost brushing against Ethan's knees. "Your shirt is soaked through, kid," Colt whispered, his gaze dropping to the row of buttons on Ethan's flannel. Colt's hands, normally so rough and commanding, were incredibly gentle as he began to undo the buttons. One by one, the silence in the cabin was so absolute that Ethan could hear the soft slip of the fabric, the erratic, heavy breathing of the rancher, and the frantic pounding of his own heart. With every button undone, more of Ethan's pale, shivering chest was exposed to the warm, flickering light of the fire and to the dark, consuming gaze of the man kneeling before him. Colt parted the wet fabric, carefully pushing the shirt off Ethan's shoulders, letting it fall away. Ethan sat there, completely vulnerable, his skin flushed from the cold and the overwhelming intensity of the moment. He wrapped his arms around himself, shivering, but his eyes were locked entirely on Colt. The rancher reached to the side, grabbing a thick, dry woolen blanket he had pulled from a storage trunk. He stood up slowly, unfolding the heavy fabric. Instead of just handing it over, Colt stepped entirely into Ethan's space, wrapping the blanket securely around the younger man's bare, trembling shoulders. As he did, his arms encircled Ethan completely. For a long, breathless moment, Colt did not pull away. He stood there, his hands resting heavily on the blanket covering Ethan's shoulders, his chest hovering mere inches from Ethan's face. Ethan looked up, the distance between their lips practically non-existent. He could see every detail of Colt's face in the firelight. The rugged scar, the dark stubble, the intense, searching depth of his steel blue eyes. The air was incredibly thick, charged with an undeniable, heavy desire that had been building quietly for 3 long weeks. Colt's gaze dropped slowly to Ethan's lips, lingering there, a heavy, ragged sigh escaping the rancher's chest. The silence inside the cabin was a living, breathing entity. Ethan sat frozen, but the shivering that racked his frame had entirely ceased to be about the bitter cold. The heavy blanket offered physical warmth, but it was absolutely nothing compared to the scorching heat radiating from a man standing mere inches away. Colt remained perfectly still, his large hands resting on the edges of the blanket, essentially caging Ethan against the rough logs of the cabin wall. "You are staring, kid," Colt finally murmured, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated through the quiet air, settling deep into Ethan's chest. It was not a reprimand. It was a dark, hushed observation, laced with a dangerous vulnerability. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat tight. He gripped the edges of the heavy wool, his knuckles turning white. "So, are you?" Ethan whispered back, his voice remarkably steady despite the chaotic rhythm of his heart. A slow, devastating smile touched the corner of Colt's lips. He slowly lifted his right hand from the blanket, closing the microscopic distance between them. Ethan's breath hitched, a sharp gasp escaping his parted lips as Colt's rough, calloused knuckles brushed lightly against his jawline. The touch was electric, a shocking contrast of rough skin against the lingering chill of Ethan's cheek. Colt opened his hand, letting his broad palm rest fully against the side of Ethan's face. The rancher's thumb began a slow, agonizingly tender rhythm, tracing the high curve of Ethan's cheekbone. "I tried to break you," Colt confessed, the words heavy, tearing from his chest. He did not break the intense eye contact, his gaze burning with a restless fire. "From the second you stepped out of that rental car, looking like a strong gust of wind would carry you back to Chicago. I looked at those soft hands and I wanted you gone. I pushed you until I knew your muscles were screaming. I waited every morning to find your bags packed." Ethan leaned instinctively into the warmth of the rancher's palm, his eyelids fluttering. "But you never left," Cole continued, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. He took a fractional step closer, his broad chest now lightly brushing against the heavy wool draped over Ethan's knees. "Every time I pushed you down, you stood right back up. You bled, you bruised, and you looked at me with those damn defiant eyes. No rookie has ever lasted this long on my land. And God help me, Ethan, no one has ever made me feel anything close to this stuff." Ethan felt a profound shift within his own soul. The fragile city boy was gone, buried somewhere out in the snow. Ethan slowly raised his own hand, letting the blanket slip slightly from his shoulder. His fingers, marked by healing blisters, reached up. He placed his hand flat against the center of Colt's chest, directly over his heart. "You did not break me," Ethan breathed, his voice carrying a quiet, fierce conviction. "You just showed me that I belonged here. But I didn't stay to prove a point to myself, Colt. I stayed because of you, duh." Colt's eyes darkened instantly, a storm of raw emotion swirling in those steel-blue depths. The last crumbling wall of the rancher's stoic defense shattered completely. "You belong to the Ridge now," Cole stated, an absolute, unwavering declaration. It was a claiming, a branding that sealed Ethan's fate to the vast skies of Montana. Colt slid his hand from Ethan's cheek, his strong fingers tangling deep into the damp, ash-blonde hair at the nape of Ethan's neck. "You belong to this land, and you belong to me, Dot." The sudden, dominant shift sent a blinding rush of heat straight to the core of Ethan's being. Anticipation pulled heavy in his stomach. "Then prove it," Ethan challenged softly, his lips parting in a silent invitation. A low, guttural sound, something between a sigh and a growl of pure longing, vibrated deep within Colt's chest. He closed the final, agonizing distance between them, tilting Ethan's head up with a firm, inescapable grip, and brought their lips crashing together. The impact was an explosion of sensation. It was a collision of desperate need, a violent release of 3 weeks of suffocating tension. Colt's lips were firm, demanding, moving against Ethan's with a hungry, consuming rhythm that entirely short-circuited Ethan's brain. The kiss tasted of the wild storm outside, of wood smoke, and of the raw, unfiltered essence of the man who commanded it. Ethan let out a soft, helpless moan, entirely surrendering to the overwhelming force of the rancher. He dropped the blanket completely, freeing his arms. He reached up, wrapping his hands tightly around Colt's broad shoulders, pulling him even closer, erasing whatever infinitesimal space was left between them. The cold of the cabin was entirely forgotten, replaced by a searing, all-consuming heat that promised to burn long through the Montana winter night. Thank you so much for joining me on this intense journey to the Black Ridge. If your heart was racing as fast as mine, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more untamed stories. But before you go, I have to know, do you think Colt was too harsh in trying to break Ethan during those first 3 weeks? Or is his tough love exactly what a city boy needed to survive the wild frontier? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let the debate begin, and I will see you in the next story.